الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. Alhamdulillah, continuing on our series of Nihayat al-Zalimin, the end of the oppressors, we come to the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud. And Ashab al-Ukhdud are mentioned in Surah al-Buruj, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the summary of a story. And the word Ashab al-Ukhdud can actually apply to both the zalim and the mazlum in the story. And this is the beauty of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in very few words is actually talking about both people. And so, in Surah Al-Buruj, Allah Azza wa Jal swears by the stars and وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَشْهُودِ وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ, right? He swears by three things or three or four things in the beginning. And then he says, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. And again, this phrase, it's one sentence, but it's really two sentences where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you two messages. Ashab al-Ukhdud, the people that were the zalim, the people that caused the torture in the ditch, and the people that were burned in the ditch, right? So قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ can mean لُعِنَ, meaning that the cursed were the people of the ditch, the ones who did the oppression, and قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, meaning the people of the ditch were murdered. Right, they were murdered, they were slaughtered when they were thrown into the ditch. And in this regard, there are actually three narrations or three stories that apply to that the Mufassirin mention can apply to this mention of the people of the ditch. One of them is a very lengthy hadith that the Prophet ﷺ tells the story. You might be familiar with it. It's called The Boy and the King. They even made, I think a long time ago, the 90s, they made like an animated film about the story. And so, but this is one very lengthy hadith that the Prophet ﷺ tells. He tells the whole story about a king that was, before our time and so on and so forth. And then there's two other instances in history that the Mufassirin have mentioned that are similar to what's being talked about in the Quran. One of them being the story of a king either from Yemen and his sister. And the other one about the Nasara of Najran, the followers of Isa alayhi salam that were from Najran. And but the story that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about the boy and the king was that there was a king who had a magician, and as he was getting older, he asked the king for a boy to be given to him that he could train in his ways of sorcery, so that he can continue serving the king after this magician has passed on. And then there's, if you know this, it's a very lengthy hadith, right? But if you know the story, then you know that the boy then eventually, on his way to the king every day, he would pass by a worshiper who was worshiping in the mountains, and he would stop by him, and then he would go to the king. He's a young man, and so he's learning about deen, and then he's learning about this evil sorcery and all this kind of stuff that the king uses to keep his people under his control. And then he eventually gets more swayed by the worshipper, by the abid. And then so he starts, secretly he's a believer, but he has to, he's under the control of this king. But he starts doing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts working karamat, right? Noble things at his hands. And so he's able to make dua for people and they become cured from their illnesses, right? And he's helping people. One of the duas he makes for one of the members of the king's court who was blind, who comes to him secretly and says, I heard that you make dua, that you are able to help people. So he says, I do this by Allah. He makes dua for him and he's cured of his blindness. And then the guy goes and sits at the court of the king again, but obviously he can see. There's a difference. And the king mentions, what's going on. And then he mentions, well, the boy did something. And then so the king goes to the boy and he says, your sorcery has become very powerful. Now you're curing people from from their blindness and this and that. And all of them, they admit, the court, the man from the court, the boy, they all admit that it is Allah that does this. It is not anything else. It's not the sorcery. But obviously the king is now being challenged, right? The same thing, you go back to all the stories of the prophets where the ruler is now being challenged. Long story short, the king basically tortures the court guy until he tells them where he makes him confess that the boy is the one teaching him. Then he tortures the boy, and then he gives up the abid, right? The one that was teaching him the deen, and then he is brought. And then these two people, besides the boy, the man from the king's court and the teacher of the boy, the abid, right? The sheikh basically, they are murdered in front of the boy. There is a saw that is placed on their head, and they're told to renounce your way. And if you don't, then they are basically tortured and killed in this gruesome manner. In this gruesome manner. In another time when the Prophet ﷺ, when the Sahaba came to him and they complained that, Ya Rasulullah, this torture is becoming unbearable. This dhulm from the people of Makkah is becoming unbearable. And the Prophet ﷺ, he responded to them. He said, there were people that came before you that were literally sawed in half, and they stood firm upon their deen. Right? They stood firm upon their deen. Subhanallah, and you see what's happening today, in all parts of the world. But you see how people are being subjected to horrible ways of killing. And we talk about Surah Al-Buruj, you literally see people burning alive, right? You've seen people burning alive yourselves. But they're staying firm upon their deen. They're staying firm upon La ilaha illallah. And this is something that is ingrained in the heart. But these two men were sawed in half. And then for the boy, and this is the nature of people of dhulm, of power, that he's already killed two people in this manner where he sawed them in half. The boy, he wants to do something different. He wants to set a different kind of example. And so he has his soldiers take him to the top of a mountain and then throw him off. This is how I want him to die. And so they take him, and as he's going, he makes a dua, Allahumma kfinihim bima shi't. Oh Allah, suffice me with whatever you will against them, right? Just give me whatever is enough against these people. And so there's a little earthquake or something happens, the mountain shakes, and the soldiers all fall off the mountain. The boy is safe. And what does he do? This is his chance, by the way, to escape. He's just been saved. The king wants to kill him. He can go and run away and be safe, but he walks right back into the king's court, right? Because he's also now giving da'wah to the people. He's setting an example. He realizes he has a bigger mission. He walks right back to the king and he tells him, all your soldiers are dead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has saved me. He again sends him out. He says, take him on a boat, take him into the middle of the river or the ocean or whatever, dump his body in, let him drown. And so he goes again, they take him and he makes the same dua, Allah, take care of me against them however you want. The boat, the waves, they toss and turn and the boat is caught in a storm or whatever. They all fall off the boat, the boy is fine. What does he do? He sails right back to the shore, goes right in front of the king, and he's standing right back there again. And then the king is looking at this kid like, what am I supposed to do? And so the boy says, I can tell you how you can kill me. I can tell you how you can kill me. He says, you tie me up to a tree, you take a bow and an arrow, and you say, Bismi Rabbi hadal ghulam. That you say, in the name of the Lord of this boy. And then you shoot the arrow, and then I will die. And the king at this point just wants to get rid of him. And so he does exactly as he says. Brings out the people, ties him up, says basically Bismillah, then fires the arrow, the boy dies. Right? The boy dies. But now the people have seen, right, that this is okay. And he's already been working his da'wah with the people. He's been helping them. He's been serving them. They already believe. But this just makes them even more firm in their belief. And so they declare their iman, and then they start renouncing this idea that this king is God or whatever. And then, now everything is out of control for the king, because the one thing he wanted was for this to stop and for people to, continue to believe in me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely took that away from him. The people all believed in Allah Azza wa Jal. And then the Prophet ﷺ describes what he did. He digs a ditch. And this took a while. You know how they did with Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? They took their time stoking that fire before they threw Ibrahim alayhi salam into that fire. But they dig a ditch, and then he tells them basically they set a big fire in the ditch, and he has everybody line up, his soldiers line up the people, one by one, tell them, renounce your deen, go back from your deen, turn away from this. If not, then you're going to jump in the fire. And one by one people come, and they're jumping or being thrown into the fire. SubhanAllah, can you imagine the scene where this is happening to possibly hundreds, if not, in the thousands of people, where one by one they're being told, give it up or jump in the fire. Give it up or jump in the fire. SubhanAllah, today, what do you see in Gaza? What are they telling these people? Give up your land, right? Give up your land. Empty your homes. Leave this place, right? Or face the wrath of what's happening. And SubhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever He puts in the hearts of these people, they're not. There was a video just now where, they're saying with the ceasefire possibly happening, may Allah Azza wa Jalla give relief. But they, interviewed one of the men who has fled to the south. He's lost a leg, and they said, "What is the first thing you're going to do when this happens?" He said, "I'm going to go back to my house. I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going to do everything." This is what's in the heart of the people. You tell them to go, they don't want to go. They don't want to renounce. And so their people are jumping into the fire one by one until the last person is a woman and her child. The Prophet ﷺ describes it. SubhanAllah, a woman and her child, infant child, and the baby not able to speak yet. And she goes and she hesitates. She hesitates before jumping into the fire. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah caused the baby to speak. The baby, and this is said there was like three people that have spoken when they cannot speak, right? And this is one of the kids that spoke at that time, but told them he told his mother, you are on the haqq, you are on the truth, trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then she jumps in as well. But Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا فَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ حَرِيقٌ. What was their punishment, right? So He says in the Quran that those people that did this to the believers, they will have عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمْ, they will have the punishment of Jahannam, which is the hellfire, وَعَذَابٌ حَرِيقٌ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ حَرِيقٌ, and they will have the punishment of a great fire. And the Mufassirin, they mention again, Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying two things in one sentence. Two things in one sentence. An emphasis in the akhirah, that they will be punished in Jahannam and they will be punished by the great fire, al-hariq, because that's also one of the descriptions of Jahannam. They'll be punished in the great fire in Jahannam. And because there are two distinct statements here, that Jahannam is for the akhirah and al-hariq is for the dunya. They will be punished by the fire in this dunya. And that's what happened to these people, was that this fire, after they killed all these people, went out of control. And it spread. And if you want to wonder how that happens, it's happening right before your eyes right now in Los Angeles, right? The fire just spreads and it's uncontrollable. And then it goes all, and then it kills, the king and his people and his soldiers at least. It wipes them out as well. So they did this to the believers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used their same fire to punish them as well. And the other two stories I'll just mention quickly because they're not as lengthy, but the other instance that this applies to is a king or a ruler who had committed zina with his own sister. And then he went to the scholars of his court and asked them to give a fatwa, basically, right? This is the gist of the story. That give a fatwa that this is permissible. This is before the Prophet ﷺ's time. That give a ruling that now Allah has made this permissible. Right? Because he had done this, his sister became pregnant and everybody knew she wasn't married and so on and so forth. But the scholars, they stood their ground and they refused. They refused to issue that. And so he had this done with these people where he dug a ditch, he put it on fire, and then he told them, you're either going to say, do what I say, or you're going to be thrown in the ditch. And they stuck to their ways. And the other one was the Nasara of Najran, the Christians of Najran, where idolatrous people came. They saw these people worshipped, Allah. They had monotheism. And so when he took over the land, he told them, you have to renounce this faith and believe in me and our religion. And they refused. And they did the same thing with them. These are well documented historical events that took place, which is why the Mufassirin mentioned them as well. So this is not even, there's not even just one instance where this happened, but this was a practice a long time ago where people would, torture people, kill them throw them into a big fire. And even the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam, they tried to do this, with him as well. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used their own punishment. And, as we say in Jaza'u min jinsil amal, the soldiers that went to throw him off the mountain were thrown off the mountain. Those that went to drown him in the ocean were drowned in the ocean. The king that didn't want people to believe, the people all believed. He wanted, to kill them with the fire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish them with a double fire, right? Those people will get Jannah, but then these people will get double fire. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with the zalimeen however He wills in His own time, however He decides. But, when, as the Prophet ﷺ said, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to seize the zalim, lam yuflitu. He's not going to let them go. He's not going to let them go. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give relief to all our brothers and sisters that are suffering their own dhulm in this day, and that He seizes the zalimeen that do this to them. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.